this morning we'll have Carol Cat from Innovis. She and her people work on all the copyrights, patents, rights, IPs, everything that relates to you, me, and the campus. They are the guys who knows what to do, and she will give us a little bit more about what you need before you start writing your thesis. Carol, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Right, good morning. My name is Carol Cat, as you've just heard, and I'm Head of Copyright and Short Courses at Innovis, which is part of Stellenbosch University. A bit of background, Innovis is a 100% university-owned company. It's our industry interaction company. It's responsible for commercialization of intellectual property, responsible for entrepreneurship and innovation on the campus. So if you get further in your research and you've got patents that you want to develop or anything to do with commercialization, you're welcome to contact our offices. We're situated at 15 De Beer Street between the Nielsen and the engineering faculty. Copyright is what I've been told to speak to you today. It's not the most enviable task because copyright is not highly entertaining or riveting, but it is important. If you're writing a thesis or a dissertation, if you're a lecturer distributing course material, copyright is important. So I hope I can hold your interest during the slideshow, and I hope that you walk away, even if it's just with one point that you didn't know before you came to sit down here. I'm going to quickly just give you a quick background for copyright. What is copyright? We all know it's there, we all know it's an intellectual property right, but what is it actually? Copyright is an intellectual property right. It's like a trademark, it's like a patent, it's like a plant breeder's right, or you've got design laws. So it's an intellectual property right. In South Africa, our copyright is governed by our Copyright Act 98 of 1978. It was amended during the 90s. As you can see, it is 40 years almost out of date. There is currently a copyright amendment bill that was presented to the public for public comment in August last year, July, August. It was not accepted favorably. A lot of the professional legal people, a lot of the academic institutions gave feedback on the copyright amendment bill. It has got far-reaching implications. It's actually in conflict with our Intellectual Property Act of 2008. So they were sent back to the drawing board, and we've just received notification about 2 weeks ago. They are going to present it in Parliament in August 2016, and then they're going to open it after that for public comment yet again. So I don't foresee that the Copyright Act is going to change within the next 6 months. Once it gets through Parliament, it's got to be promulgated. It could take another 2 to 3 years before it officially gets implemented. So for now, the 1978 Act stands. It doesn't make provision for our technological advancements, so the understanding that we have is what you would do with print, you would do in the electronic environment. So what's applicable to printing with copyright, it's applicable in the electronic environment, just until we get something more, I'd say, comprehensive. Copyright exists on all literary, musical, artistic works and dramatic works of authorship. It exists automatically, all right? It is territorial in nature. In other words, what applies in the USA under their Copyright Act doesn't necessarily apply under South Africa's Copyright Act. Don't assume because the Americans can use the following and do whatever for educational or academic purposes, we're entitled to do the same. They're governed by a different act. So your rights and methods and period of protection differ from country to country. Your copyright also grants the author, you as the writer, exclusive rights. You can either allow or prevent somebody from using your work in the way that you want it to be used or not to be used. And copyright has an economic function for the author, and it has a moral function. You are worthy of being accredited or acknowledged for work that you've created. Is it important when writing a thesis? Avoid infringing someone's copyright when writing your thesis. And by that, using somebody's third-party content without permission. That's basically what it's telling you. It is automatic as long as your article is, or your writing is in an original form, and it's in a fixed or a tangible form. Copyright doesn't subsist in an idea or a fact that's in your head. You have to put it into a fixed form, and it must be original. You don't have to pay a registration fee. You don't have to obtain process or go through a process to obtain copyright protection. You can claim copyright on your work that you've created of its originality by putting your little C sign and putting your name or Stellenbosch University and the date that you created. The date is quite important. 10 years down the line, somebody could possibly have access to your information, and now you've got to set about proving you actually created it first. So the date is quite important. Another important thing when writing your thesis, as a student at Stellenbosch University, you assign your copyright to the institution. It includes all your research conducted as part of your studies. The assignment takes place on registration. A lot of students aren't aware of it. If you go and read your fine print, you will notice that you are assigning your rights to the institution. Remember that when you eventually come to the stage of wanting to publish, often publishers want to ownership of your copyright. You as a student are not in a position to grant permission or give them copyright. We as the university own the copyright. And we also advise you to proceed with caution when a publisher is asking you for exclusive copyright ownership, because it could be restrictive on your research. Your ownership of copyright. Normally, your owner of the copyrighted work is the person who created the work, but we have exceptions, one of them being employment. As a staff member of Stellenbosch University, anything you create in the course and scope of your employment at Stellenbosch University goes to Stellenbosch University. Your other exception is a commission. If you as an artist get paid by somebody to paint something, create something for them, you are basically giving across your ownership of copyright in that work by commission. Anything that you create for the state controlled. If you're in a medical field and you get asked to compile a report on the HIV status of South Africa, and it's the state that has requested that you create this for them, that copyright automatically goes to the state. You cannot control that copyright. It was done basically, you were commissioned by the state to do so. And then finally, your other exception is assignment. If you get assigned the use of somebody else's copyright, then that person has assigned that ownership to you for use of that specific work. Stellenbosch University is the sole owner of works of authorship created by staff or students in the course and scope of their duties. It's very important to bear that in mind. Also remember, as a student at Stellenbosch University, yes?
Sorry, I was just thinking of a lot of part-time lecturers aren't contracted by the university. I, for instance, present a course as a part-time lecturer. In that case, do the copyright of the course also belong to the university? Because
You create the course as part of your duties as a part-time lecturer at Stellenbosch University. So the content belongs to us. You must have a look at your employment contract.
and if there is not a contract in place,
Then you need to speak to your human resource people.
okay,
Because normally anything, if you, as part of your job description, even if you're part-time employment, but your part of your job description was to create the following content for the specific course, that belongs to Stellenbosch University. All right. Okay, students, when you get bursaries from outside organizations or scholarships, remember it doesn't cover the full cost of your studies or research. So bear that in mind. You're not in a position, it's against, you cannot basically by law grant IP rights to outside organizations for any of the work that you've created. All right? It resides in Stellenbosch University. An important factor to remember, in South Africa, remember, copyright lasts for the duration of the life of the author plus 50 years after the death of the author. So if the author died in 1950, his work will go out of copyright in 2000. If it's a joint authorship, it's 50 years after the death of the longest surviving author. So if there are 5 authors and the other person only passes on 25 years after the first author, there's still another 50 years to run. Only thereafter will it then go into public domain, and don't automatically assume it's going to go into public domain. Walt Disney's works were going to fall into public domain because somebody had slept on their IP contract. They picked it up luckily. I think it was in 2018 it would go out of copyright. They've obviously attended to it. It will fall into a trust when it comes out of copyright. So don't automatically assume authors passed away 50 years ago, the work is in public domain. There could be an estate where it's been bequeathed to family. There could be a trust. So be cautious, don't just assume. The other thing to remember that in other countries, it's not 50 years, it's 70 years after the death of the author. So don't think, oh, well, you're using the work in South Africa, even though the author was American, I can use the work, it's public domain. Be cautious of that. Now we get to the part where you are going to write your thesis. You've now heard of the word copyright. You know the alarm bells are now starting to gently ring. And now we're going to be using third-party content in our thesis. Now we've got to have a few perspectives. Your basic copyright principles apply. Whether it's for a thesis, whether it's for course content, basic copyright principles apply throughout. Now you're writing your thesis. When should you be requesting permission to use third-party content in your thesis? If you're going to be reproducing, publishing or communicating your thesis in a material form, print or electronic, now you at the writing stage, you're not even thinking where it's going to go from here. You're going to present it to try and get your degree, and that's going to be it. Try and think long term. Is it going to go onto Sun Scholar? Is it going to go onto our repository? That's electronic dissemination. Now you can't just go and put third-party content in there. You're going to have to request permission. So just bear in mind what you're going to be doing eventually with your thesis. You also could write the thesis, submit it, and 5 years later then decide to publish sections of that thesis. Be careful then that you haven't got third-party content for which you don't have permission. If you use whole text from an article, a paper, an internet material, a whole court case, whole conference proceedings, anything that's complete text, not just a section of the text, but complete text. The next thing is very, very tricky if you use a substantial part of a copyrighted piece of material. I'm not qualified to decide whether it's substantial or insubstantial, neither are you qualified to determine that. You need an expertise in that field because it doesn't just go on quantity. It's not because I use 6 pages of 10 pages. It goes on quality as well. If you've taken that article and you've taken the crux of the article, which is the core of that whole article, even if it's only a page of 20, it could be seen as a substantial part because it's the core of that piece of research. So it's a very, very tricky one to determine if substantial or insubstantial. And important one, when you're using photographs, diagrams, maps, graphs, tables, it's considered an artistic work. It's considered a complete work. You're not going to put half a graph or half a map in your thesis. You're going to put the whole image in. It's a complete work. You should be requesting permission to use it. It's not sufficient just to accredit it or acknowledge the source. It's considered a complete work. So those are your basic principles. When you're busy with your thesis, if you're using any of these things, request permission. When don't you need permission, which is more important for you, because you want to do something where you don't need permission. If you paraphrase, you read the article, you rewrite a small part. There again, you can't rewrite the whole article in your own words. It has to be a small part of the original source. You have to reference the original source correctly and give them credit. Whether you're going to say summarized or compiled from, that's preferably what you should do because you're indicating that you've taken the work, you've read it, and that you've paraphrased it. It's not like you're doing a complete copy or direct copy of it. If you use an insubstantial portion of copyrighted material, here, very tricky. You can't determine if it's insubstantial or substantial, so be cautious there. But if you're going to use what you consider insubstantial, remember to reference your original author and source. If you quote a small part of a copyrighted work, remember to put it into quotation marks and give correct referencing. The big thing is the whole time to indicate you are aware it's not your own content, it is somebody else's content. You are welcome to cite a source in your text. Just be cautious of not citing somebody in a negative context. If your research has disproven somebody else's research, or don't write there that the man was incorrect, he obviously didn't follow the correct procedures, you're basically infringing on his moral right. If you indicate that your results showed different outcomes to X, Y, and Z's results, then you're not labeling the person as being ignorant or not following the correct process. You're basically saying you don't agree with the outcome. So just be careful when citing to not always put it into a negative context. There's a way of just throwing your words around so that it doesn't sound like that you're actually belittling the person's research. Then using an individual random piece of data, a fact. There's no copyright in a fact. The sun is shining outside. There's no copyright in that. It's a fact. Things like a telephone directory, which we don't hardly ever use now, There's no copyright on it, it's a fact. It's a person's name, it's the address, it's the telephone number. So there's no copyright on a fact or an individual random piece of information. An important aspect for you when writing your thesis, I'm sure you've all heard of fair use or fair dealing as we refer to it in South Africa. Does it apply to your thesis? This is now the big question. Our Copyright Act Section 12(1) makes provision that you can actually copy, it doesn't say substantial, it says a reasonable portion of work for research. But it must be for private study, for personal or private use. So you can do a single copy for your personal private use. However, copying of a whole portion is not considered reasonable. So you can't basically, if you're going to copy an entire journal article for your purpose of research, argue that it was reasonable. A whole journal article is not reasonable. So the big factor here is our Act doesn't make a very clear provision for this fair dealing aspect. It's not clearly defined. There's different interpretations. You may be allowed to copy a reasonable amount. However, what are you going to be doing with your thesis finally? So if you've copied it and used a bit in your thesis, you're going to be distributing your thesis eventually one day. So the minute you distribute or communicate your thesis in any form, fair dealing doesn't cover any distribution whatsoever. So there again, you've got to think of where you're going with this thesis long term, where you're going to end up with it one day. Now, we often get asked, plagiarism or copyright infringement? It's quite simple to divide it. Plagiarism is a moral issue. Copyright infringement is a legal issue. You've got a small little area, a grey area in the middle, where you'll get copyright infringement and plagiarism. Your plagiarism is when you don't say where you took it from. You just put it in there as if it's your own work. And copyright infringement is when you take it without permission. You may even accredit it, but you've actually taken it without permission when you've required permission. So when you get this little grey area in the middle, it's when you take it off without permission and then you still pass it off as your own work. Then you're sitting with a dual infringement. Your basic differences are, we'll deal first with your plagiarism versus your copyright infringement. Plagiarism is a violation of a moral right and a violation of academic standards. Why would you want to copy somebody else's work? Yes?
Sorry, Carol, I don't want to stop your meeting, but just as an example, that previous picture which you had on the board about the moral so that was a visual thing. So which one did you get like
the previous image, the one I had before this one.
Yeah.
I'll show you underneath. Come on. You don't want to go back, okay. That one.
Yeah, so that one, so you have the reference there, but you physically need to get the permission. So would that be then?
There's your reference, okay?
Okay, but this is then a complete work or not?
It's a complete work. So you're saying I should request permission?
Well, that's fine.
Okay, I'm going to go further down the presentation. Terms of use. You go and have a look.
Okay.
Don't automatically assume Wikipedia or any of those you're free to use. Go and have a look. There are different restrictions.
Okay.
You're free to use this.
Okay.
All right, so you've got to go and have a look at your terms of use.
Okay.
Okay. If your big thing is royalty-free doesn't mean copyright-free either. Because you're not paying money for it doesn't mean it's free of copyright.
Okay.
So that's the big thing you've got to look at.
Okay.
All right. So if it tells you you're free to use it with attribution, you've attributed. Sometimes I tell you can do what you like with it. You don't even have to attribute it. Okay. All right. Your violation of moral right and your academic standards is plagiarism. A legal violation is copyright infringement. Plagiarism involves verbal or written copying of the original. It could be somebody's presentation right here while they were speaking. You wrote down verbatim what they said. But you put it into your work and you don't indicate anywhere Carol Katz said the following. You just put it in and they think it's your very clever saying. Your copyright infringement is physical. There's a physical copying of an original, be it in print or be it electronic. Even if you do acknowledge there's copying without permission if it's a reasonable or substantial portion. Plagiarism is you are failing to correctly attribute your authorship of the copyright material. Copyright infringement is failure to obtain permission and in certain instances pay for use of that copyrighted material. They may charge you a copyright fee if you request permission. And your plagiarism is infringing an author's moral right, but your copyright infringement is your author's work or reputation, his moral right has been infringed, but you're also infringing his potential income. He could be earning money if you go and buy his book, and now you're copying his book. So those are your basic differences between your plagiarism and copyright infringement. Obtaining permission to get content, you can see again on the image that we've used. All right. How do you get permission to use content? It's not as simple as what it sounds. It sounds quick and easy. It's not. It could actually become quite a lengthy process. How do you obtain permission from your rights holders? Yes?
Let me just go back one slide. That image that you have on there, are you saying that that's an example of, if you get an image like that from online, you would have to, or are you going to talk about images maybe later?
You use that image and you click on its terms of use and it tells you how to request permission, or it's all copyright protected, they don't have to request permission before I can use the image.
But that's a specific system for images that you find online, so it would be different for academic works or tables, because then you would contact the authors directly.
Your author or your publisher, if you're using Ethernet articles, you've got to go and put the terms of use of the website. In some cases, your website owner won't necessarily own the content. It could be someone who put an article on the website, and the website owner is not the owner of that content. It becomes very complex.
And the same is true for a presentation. So not something that you actually print, but if you just use an image that you find online in the presentation.
Our Copyright Act doesn't define what you may do during the presentation, but the general understanding is for academic purposes in a classroom situation, you can use the present, but you can't distribute unless your images and everything are free to distribute. So if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation in class, don't just go distribute it if you've got a whole lot of images and graphs and tables in it. First go and check if you can or not. Okay.
Sorry, Karen. Maybe that's a later thing. I just want to know, but that's a very, very relevant thing for us, which is asking us like lectures, because you know we want to make our slides look nice for the students and put in pictures and so there's a lot of my colleagues that have no problem just going on to Google and take whatever images they want, you know, and I personally I'm much more careful of that, not because of legal, they're more kind of a moral issue for me, but it makes it difficult, you know, because it's so difficult. So I would love to know if
All right.
are you saying that you can actually get any picture from the internet, but just not distribute?
You've got about 40 websites that you are free to use the images on those websites. If you go and call up copyright free, you don't want royalty free. Royalty free means you pay the license and you don't have to pay every time you use the image. That's what royalty free means.
Yeah.
You're looking for copyright free. There are about, I think there are 40 or 46 websites currently. Granted, the pictures are not the Shutterstock and they're not our stock and they're not the image that you want. But you can get something similar to what you need that's not in copyright, that you're free to use, with or without attribution, depending on the requirements of the website. You've got material that is under Creative Commons licenses, but you've got to remember there's 6 Creative Commons licenses. So before you use the content, go and check what the licensing provision is for that specific image. So, and then you've got things in public domain that you can use. You just have to make 100% sure it says this material is in public domain. A lot of Wikipedia's material will tell you it's in public domain. So that's quite important to bear that in mind.
So you've got to go homework, it's not just...
No, and another thing is don't just think ClipArt from Microsoft is free to use because it's on your computer.
Yeah.
There's an end user agreement for ClipArt.
Yes, I just want to add on to that. So when we do a presentation in class and we hand out the slides,
Not unless you clear the copyright on the slide.
Okay.
If it's third-party content, you need to clear the copyright on it.
okay.
All right. You put it up on the screen. Nobody's got access. It's your copy. The minute you take it and you distribute it. Yeah.
And we've seen us take pictures
Now you want to get permission. Now the fun and games start. How are you going to get permission from all these people? Especially when you've got 20, 30 articles or items of third-party content. Your first and foremost is check the terms of use of material. If you're using a book, look what it says on the imprint page. It will tell you copyright Pearson's or copyright John Wiley and Co. Sometimes they'll say copyright the author. You can end up contacting the publisher, but at the end of the day, if that book has gone out of print, the rights have reverted to the author, and this is where the fun and games start. Now you've got to trace somebody somewhere in the world that wrote this book. Sometimes, and most times in academic publishing, he is still linked to an institution, but what happens if he's retired? What happens if he moves on? So it could be quite complex trying to determine where the rights lie. Terms of use on internet articles, it's normally in the right top-hand corner. On the bottom left-hand corner, it will say terms of use or terms and conditions. Go and read it carefully. Wonderful if it says you're free to use and do what you like with it. That's what you want to read. If it doesn't say that, read it carefully. It's normally worded in legal jargon, so don't misinterpret it. If it tells you you're free to use for non-academic, non-commercial academic purposes, your thesis is academic. You're not spinning money out of it when you put it onto Sun Learn. It's academic, it's non-commercial. You are then free to use and distribute. It'll tell you possibly you're free to use for personal use. No further distribution allowed without permission. Then you've got to ask permission because you can't print it or put it onto Sun Scholar unless you have permission. So very important is to check the terms of use of your material. Don't automatically assume everything of the government is public domain. It isn't. Some of your white papers, some of your green papers, your government printers hold the rights to it. You need to request permission. They normally give you a little number as well. Permission has been granted and they give you a government printer's number that you've got permission to use it. The next thing that you want to use, you can use open source, but check your licensing. Your Creative Commons licensing, the 6 licenses, one would say share, distribute, do what you like, no attribution required. Next one will say you're free to share but with attribution. The other one will tell you you're free to use, modify, do what you like. Check the licensing provisions. If you take a table and you take out some of the data and you put your own results in, you've modified somebody's data. Check if you're allowed to do it if you're using a Creative Commons image. So the big thing is always check what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Your next step is you've got to determine actually who owns this material, and this is where it really becomes tricky. As I said to you as well, you can go and see it on a website, but the website owner doesn't necessarily own the content that's been uploaded. There's an article uploaded. Let's say it's Financial Mail. Financial Mail will possibly have got the writer of the article to assign the copyright to Financial Mail, so fine, Financial Mail owns it. But now we go onto another website, and a person's uploaded an article, but he maintains his copyright. The owner of the website isn't the copyright holder. So very important, determine who owns the material, so that you can just cut down your process to request permission by a couple of days, because if you're going to be running around trying to contact the wrong people, time evolves, and with your next look it's 4 weeks down the line, you still don't have permission. Now, a big thing is to request permission, but request it in writing. Verbal permission on the telephone is not going to fly because we've got no proof. You leave the institution, we've got nothing on record. Copyright permission must be in writing. When you're requesting permission, give them as much information as possible to stop going backwards and forwards. Indicate it is for your thesis. Indicate what it's for, when you're going to be submitting your thesis. Indicate that it's for non-commercial academic purposes, that you're going to envisage possibly using print and electronic for your Sun Scholar. You have to indicate these things. You can't, if they're given you permission to use it, 3 years down the line, tell them, sorry, I've put it onto Sun Scholar now, because they didn't give you permission to distribute it electronically. So just remember to give them as much information as possible. It just saves a little bit of time. And the other thing you've got to do is you've got to keep following up until you receive a reply. Publishers do not respond quickly to a copyright application because they can generate income, but they don't generate as much income from a copyright fee as what they would from a royalty from selling a book. So you will go onto the back burner of the publisher, and when you submit it, the publisher's automatic message will come up and say there's a 4 to 6 weeks delay before you can expect some form of response. And it's not to say yes, it's to just get more information. So remember, just plan ahead. It could take a while to get permission. Don't just assume you're going to have permission overnight. Now, what happens if you don't receive permission? for any of your applications, you're going to have to consider to remove the information from your assignment. Your other factor is a person that's the copyright owner or your publisher could charge you a fee. And it could get quite expensive. You end up paying thousands for your thesis for copyright fees. If you're charged a fee, here again, consider to remove the material. If it's a small enough part, you can paraphrase it, rewrite it in your own words with necessary acknowledgement. Or you can reduce the extent of the material that you want to use to an insubstantial portion and then credit the original source there again as well. Do not use material for which you do not have permission, because you've assigned your copyright to Stellenbosch University, so we end up being sued for copyright infringement, all right? Permission has been given. You've now got your letter, your email, or whatever to tell you may use my content for whichever way you described it. But what may you and may not do with this material? You must credit the original source. Some of the publishers even go so far as to say it has to be accredited as follows, and they give you the exact wording, and it will be for the following purposes. It's quite a long paragraph they give you. You also, if you've been given permission to change or alter, let's say it's a table and you want to just amend a bit of the data to reflect yours, or the graph, you just want to change a little bit to reflect your results, you have to state that you've altered or modified it from the original with permission. That's only if you've got permission to do so. You can't just change it if you haven't been given permission. And then you must use it in the manner for which permission has been granted. If you've been granted permission to use it in print format, then you can't distribute it electronically. You must use it for the manner in which permission was granted. So up front, just ask for it all up front, because that's the only way you can cover yourself, all right? You may not alter or distort the original material in any way which is going to damage your author's moral rights. Like I said earlier, you cannot damage his moral right, even though you don't believe what his results were that he achieved 10 years or 15 years ago and you believe it's wrong. You can't alter or distort that original material that's going to put him into a bad light. That, during his research period, that is what stood, and you have to give acknowledgement to that. Now you're going to want to publish your thesis. You've now gone through the whole process. You've got your degree. Your thesis is on Sun Scholar. And wow, publishers have contacted you. They want to publish your thesis. What do you have to remember? A, you've assigned your copyright to Stellenbosch University. So you cannot just give permission and say, go right ahead and publish my thesis. There's a process. At Stellenbosch University, you've got to go through the process. If you're going to be publishing in a book, taking parts of your thesis and putting it into a book publication, be it print or online, you're going to need permission from your supervisor, from your head of department, and from your dean of your relevant faculty. Our calendar, our yearbook, which is available on the university's website, Part 1 General, there are provisions regarding your format, your submission, the duplication, your publication. You also have to indicate what percentage is your own material, what percentage is third-party content. You have to indicate you've got permission to use the third-party content. So you may not publish your assignment or thesis or dissertation in any form other than in an accredited academic journal without the written permission of your dean of your relevant faculty. But you'll end up going to your supervisor first, you'll go to your head of department, you'll refer it to your dean. The university doesn't normally claim income out of any artistic, literary, or musical works that you've created, even if you did it as part of your studies. All right? It's a purely administrative thing. You can think the volume of students that you deal with. We've got to manage everybody's royalties and everybody's income and publishing payment fees and things. There's no ways. We haven't got an infrastructure to do so. So you're responsible, if you're going to publish in a book, to have that, you have a contract with your publisher. But we normally advise you to come past our office first if you're wanting to publish. If you've got a contract, let's look at it, because unless we are capable to it, because it's really a problem to manage it, we may assign you the copyright in that thesis for that specific publication. Not forever, just for that specific publication. And or we'll give you usage rights if we don't give you assignment. We allow you to use it for that specific publication. And we're not going to claim the income of these works, but we ask you to rather approach us. We get often, they approach us when the contract has already been signed and there are problems. Rather come to us up front and see. It's just a word of advice, basically. Finally, you're publishing. You must choose a specialized academic publisher with a high quality end product. Avoid mass vanity publishers. There's a specific company, and I obviously can't mention names, that are targeting students via Facebook, social media, Twitter. The student automatically feels flattered that I've been approached to present my thesis now in a book publication. There's a lot of controversial information about the specific publisher. They've got about 4 or 5 branches and they trade under different countries. The end of the day is they don't conduct peer reviews. They don't have a normal editorial process. They want exclusive distribution rights and want you to assign a minimum of 20% of your copyright to them in print and electronic formats. So we ask you to proceed with caution. When you get something and somebody's targeted you off social media, be careful. They obviously go and look at our Sun Scholar, they pick it up, they pick the person up on social media, and that's how they target you. There are people that have gone ahead and published and that they haven't had remarkable results. Remember to try and achieve a workable compromise between yourself, the publisher that you decide to go with, and with Stellenbosch University, because bear in mind we are behind the scenes all the time. And we are a public research institution. We want wide dissemination of our research through especially Sun Scholar. So we're very cautious about granting exclusive rights to a publisher because it does restrict our research. I do know under Sun Scholar there's a thing called a Spark Addendum, that when you're putting your material onto Sun Scholar, that you have to look at that Spark Addendum. In that, it's basically agreeing that you are still able to use your work for your purposes of research and for your academic purposes. Don't restrict yourself so that you sign away everything and then now you want to use your article, your thesis in your classroom as part of your course content. You've got to go and request permission from the publisher to use your own content. So be careful, just be cautious, just to protect yourself basically. I just included in the presentation a few quick links. One is to our website regarding our intellectual property policy of Stellenbosch University regarding the commercialization of our intellectual property. It's quite an important one for students and staff. Then I've got the yearbook from Stellenbosch University regarding how the format, the duplication, etc. for your thesis. And then you can access the Copyright Act for South Africa on the following 2 websites if you want to go and study the Copyright Act and see if you can help us in any way. And then our contact details, if you need to ask us any questions. We're 2 people that head up this specific division in Innovus. It's myself and Elmine Lavelle, and you're welcome to contact us. All right, any questions?
Slightly off the mark, but I understand that a student's first publication after their thesis should be done in collaboration with their supervisor or promoter.
Your journal article. Your journal article, yeah. That is normally run Elmine sitting at the back there from our Department for Research Development. And they normally work in collaboration because they monitor the journal publications that students are problem being that somewhere back home somebody created it and somebody has published a book and somebody's not getting these royalties. So it comes down to the economic value of it at the moment.
So it's all about money.
At the end of the day, your real academic, it's about, he just wants that acknowledgement and he wants to get his work out there and get that exposure. But you've got the other academics that want to generate income from it. So it's complex. Yes?
She's first, I'll ask after. I just want to ask, I think in today's internet culture, especially with blogs, so in my field, in science communication, there's a lot of people who have blogs and they live for publicity. They want you to share it. As long as you acknowledge it, I mean, I would put my head on the block to say that they will not sue you ever, as long as you acknowledge that, them as the source, because they write it to get profile, to become better.
Most of your blogs is because you're putting it out there, you want to put your thoughts out there, you want to see what the people's reactions are, but don't have a look where everyone's uploaded. There will be a terms of use. And if you don't check it, most of them are going to say to you, do what you like with this.
Because then I think, like in course materials, if you use a blog as a case study, for example, so you would use the whole thing, but it's online, it's open access, anybody can.
If it's open access, or the terms of use say you're free to do what you like with it, you can do what you like with it. You can modify it, you can do whatever you like, if that's what the terms of use are. If it's under open access and the specific licensing that you can share and do whatever, you do whatever. But the big thing is just check what you may or may not do with the material. If you don't have a look at your images if you go Google or whatever image you're looking for, and you click on the image and that image pops up, the wording is going to stay on the side here. This image may be subject to copyright. Don't touch it, because that means they know that somewhere there is some copyright aspect attached to this. Go look for the one that says this is a public domain.
But if it does say copyright, then you can still go trace back and see.
You can trace back if you want to find the person that owns it. If you want to specifically use that image, you've got to trace it.
But even if they give you permission, you would still credit them.
You've still got, but they will determine under what conditions they're giving you the permission. If they tell you they want accreditation, acknowledgement, and this is how you must acknowledge, you've got to do exactly what they tell you. They grant you permission. It's their work.
I'm just thinking, so if you unknowingly used something not in a correct manner in copyright terms, and you have to ask permission after you've already
Retrospective request.
is that a bigger problem for you, or how
If you've got a publication, you're already out on Science Scholar and you're everywhere, and about turns around and says, no, you may not use it. You've got to put all sat and I've read articles, I've read the act, I've done it, but I've actually created the content myself.
I mean,
So,
still decide then.
I can still turn around and say to her, listen, am I easy about that image, block it out? And then she can just block off the image.